Hello and welcome to the Astro Garden, a place for astrologers to chat all things astro. I'm your host Janessa of By Jove Astrology. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome back to the Astro Garden. Today is Thursday, September 12th, Jupiter's Day. I think this is my first time recording a solo episode on Jupiter's Day. So we'll see how this vibe works. It's been busy. I usually try to record these earlier in the week, but it has been quite busy with all kinds of new schedules. On top of the schedules, there's been a lot of care work that I've been having to do with the kids. I mean, obviously they're kids, but it's been especially the busyness and the new routines have been especially hard on some of them. So just needing a little extra both in the mornings and the evenings, and that has left me with less time to do a lot of the things that I need to do to take care of myself. So I was busy doing those earlier this week. But yeah, today I wanted to feel into eclipse season a little bit. We've got the first of this series of Pisces Virgo eclipses happening next week, next Wednesday. And for me, this feels like it has snuck up on me really quickly. So this will be across my 1st and 7th house axis. So angular. And yeah, I don't know if it gets more influential than that. I mean, the 10th and the 4th, depending on your placements, can be also very activating. But yeah, so I'm very curious and very open-minded about it at this point. It will be interesting to see what plays out. So with astrology, remember, we can always go back to see what was going on the last time these eclipses happened. And that would be 8 years ago. So in 2015, 2016, and maybe into 2017. And those were huge years for me. I think the first one last time was in Virgo, right around the same time, September 20th, I think. And I think right around that time is when I was signing a lease with my now husband for our first house that we were going to rent together. So it was very exciting. It was the first time I ever did that with anyone. And yeah, that just kicked off this whole series of events that has greatly changed both of our lives. Shortly after that, we moved in together November 1st, the day after Halloween. And I think I got pregnant a week later. I'm not exaggerating. So very kind of perfect timing. It's not something that I think we planned, but ultimately was literally perfect timing. We had a cute little 2-bedroom house in Minneapolis that was the perfect size for us. And this was just a really cozy little nest that, we couldn't have asked for anything better. We really lucked out into being able to rent that place that we did. So yeah, we were able to welcome our daughter there. We also got married during this time in 2016, and then late 2016 into early 2017, I shifted careers completely from the nonprofit sector to the private sector, to corporate. which was huge. So yeah, there's just like a lot of back-to-back changes. And this is angular for my husband too. It's in his 10th and 4th. So, the difference this time around is that last time for me, the North Node was in my 7th house. And this time, the North Node will be in my 1st house. So it's like, similar themes, things that might rhyme, but it's not exactly repeating. So, very curious. I will keep you all in the loop in happenings. Maybe it might even be easier for you to observe from the outside. But yeah, that 1st house being all about, who you are, your personality, your physical appearance, and like some of those things, like at their core, don't necessarily like change, right? I feel like, eclipses are big bringers of change, but what does change look like when it's core to your being? And like, yes, on a surface level, somehow that can change, but I feel like it's more about like this kind of change in the 1st house is more about unveiling what already was there versus like, now I'm going to be a different person or something like that. It's, you are who you are, and you can change how you do things, and you can change things about you, but at your core, I feel like you're still the core of who you are still exists in the same way, but maybe is going about things differently, or maybe there's like things that are revealed to you about who you are that you weren't aware of before. So that's something I'm keeping in mind. And then the 7th house is all about those one-on-one relationships, traditionally called the marriage house in ancient astrology. And that can look different today. That can be just any long-term partner. It can also be those like business partnerships or contracts. The 7th house I see a lot associated a lot with like client work, or people who are working one-on-one with clients, whether they're like a diviner or in the beauty industry or massage therapy, or more like a mental health therapist. That 7th house can be really a big signifier of those types of relationships or that type of work. So yeah, lots of big changes in that realm of life too. And the South Node, the North Node can be kind of like what we're striving toward, and the South Node can act as like a lessening, like whatever that is near is kind of like shrinking. But it's also like not always that straightforward. I think Krista of Practical Astros has described the nodes as being like, obviously there's the Ouroboros, which is like a very common image, and an old image describing the nodes, but she's just also described it as like the infinity symbol, where it's like this dragon kind of like chasing its tail and like that figure 8, which I really like. I think that shows more of like the dynamicism, how dynamic it is. It's going, the movement of energy between them versus like circular or like a pendulum. It's more dynamic. The figure 8. So yeah, I've been working with that image more lately in thinking about eclipses and nodes and where they are in the chart. When I've talked about the nodes a lot with clients, you know, my advice is always, you know, I think in modern astrology, one of the things that I have heard a lot is that you want to go towards your north node and kind of like try to leave behind your south node. And I really don't agree with that. I don't like the idea of like leaving behind any of ourselves. I don't think that's going to lead to some greater level of like balance or higher level of being. I think we can maybe, I think to experience a higher level of being, we have to probably accept all of who we are versus trying to do away with a piece of ourselves. So I don't like to use that. You know, I feel like we might naturally be inclined to work toward or strive for our north node and maybe feel more comfortable around south node topics, or like might be where we go when we are feeling like we can't strive. But I try to encourage people to find just like a balance between them. And I don't mean a balance like a 50-50 balance, because I feel like balance is misconstrued a lot of times to being this thing that's like perfectly equal on both sides. I think it's something that's always changing. You know, if we think of like a tightrope walker and like them holding, you know, the long pole to help them balance, you know, sometimes they are leaning to one side or the other to achieve the balance. So that's like a reminder that I always give to my clients, is that it's not always 50-50. Sometimes it looks like 60-40. Sometimes it might be like 90-10. And different times in life are going to call for different things. So using the nodes as like these like points of polarity, but reminding yourself that you can go between them and that one is not necessarily better than the other, that we need both. That's some of my advice. Eclipse season is also just really weird. I think when I was starting to study astrology, you know, I wanted it to be very analytical and I wanted it to be very cut and dry. But when it came to eclipses, it was like the first thing that I felt like I had to really kind of release that analytical side around. You know, I think it's overused. It's maybe a cop-out, but I really do think they have this like deep portal energy. And I think that that's like a very woo word. And it might be a turnoff to a lot of people. But I do really find that to be an accurate description of what happens in eclipse season. These are times of like intense change. It may be more visible depending on where it's happening in your chart. Again, like this for me, for Pisces, Virgo is going to be my 1st and 7th house. The eclipse cycle that's ending is in Aries and Libra, and that has been my 2nd and 8th house. And even though I have placements in both of those houses, it has been a lot more subtle than even the eclipses in the 3rd and 9th house were. And maybe it's just too soon to really know the full effects of it, because there are effects of it, but it just feels a lot more subtle. I don't feel like I have a handle on the full story of those yet. But yeah, it's a time of transformation, and whatever the houses are that the eclipses are taking place in. The way that I got into astrology actually was, or when I got into astrology, it was the eclipses in my 3rd and 9th houses. Very loud. I do have a lot of placements in the 9th house. So I'm guessing that might have amplified it. But like I said, even though I have a couple placements in the 2nd and 8th houses, it has been quieter. I just, it was things with my interest in astrology really are tied to like the dates of those eclipses, like pretty tightly, in the 3rd and the 9th. I downloaded the Chani app. I think it was like within a week of must have been like the April and May eclipses that year of 2022. And then by the next set of eclipses, I was like getting my first astrology reading, before I even got the first astrology reading, I was registering for Nightlight Astrology's year 1. And I really I don't know how to describe how I learned astrology other than like absorbing it and like inhaling it. It was like something about it was deeply familiar and very easy for me to learn. And it all just came rushing in like at once. I mean, I studied, I went to classes, I read a lot. I did a lot of like deep dives on the internet, and really picked it up very, very quickly. And since then, I've continued to study, but it felt like a distinct change once those eclipses were done, of like the speed at which I was learning. But yeah, it really felt like I was Alice falling through the looking glass, into this other, this whole other way of knowing things. And just very, there's this very quick absorption of this whole other world that I wasn't aware of beforehand. So when I say that I really think eclipses are portals, like that's exactly what I mean. It's like entering another dimension, like this whole new level of awareness, and just a really exciting time of like very quick, intense change. So yeah, I think one of the things everyone should be doing now, like I mentioned before, is looking back through your pictures, looking back through your emails, from 2015, 2016, 2017 to see what was kind of going on then, for you. And those might be some of the high level themes might be coming back up again with this eclipse. And we can look back even further too. We can look back to the last time that the nodes were in the same place, which would actually be like another 8 years before that. So we can look back to like 2008, give or take a year. So like 2007, 2008, 2009, to see what was happening then. For me, I was still in college, and that was like a lot of the time that I was actually studying abroad, which is very interesting. I haven't unpacked that yet. And what that might look like this time around. But that was super formative, right? Like my whole worldview was shifting big time. So yeah, look back through your journals. The photo apps are great, like Google Photos or wherever you have your photos stored. If you can look back, like that can just bring you instantly back into what frame of mind you were in, highlighting themes or trends that were going on at the time. Yeah, memory lane. So yeah, pay attention in the next couple of weeks here. So we get the first eclipse, and then it's already kind of starting now with where we are in the lunar cycle. So we can probably start to feel a lot of the energy at this point. And then we have the first eclipse, and then it's like another 2 weeks between them. And then after that, it's kind of like there is a little bit of period on the outside end of it too, where it's just a little bit out of sorts. It's kind of like the whole world like enters the twilight zone, and it feels a little bit like a mixed bag of like anything can happen during this time. Lots of world events. So be paying attention to things that are happening now too, because they are things that will come up again in the rest of this eclipse cycle. So the Virgo Pisces one is just beginning. That'll be like a year and a half or so of those. And we're nearing the end of the Aries Libra eclipses. So that story is probably going to be things that are a little bit more familiar, things that have been dominating the headlines for the past year and a half or so. The Astrology podcast has a great episode on eclipses. I highly recommend that. It might even be 2 episodes where especially the Libra Aries eclipses are Chris Brennan, and I think he's joined by Nick Dagan Best. They break down like how the eclipses have been tied in history to specifically to solar figures like kings and rulers around the world, and how eclipses are often tied to big events for them, whether it's coronations or downfalls or different events within like world leadership. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy how accurately and how far back we can look to these events being tied to the eclipses. So I highly recommend that. I think if you were not sold on the data behind astrology, that episode will seal the deal. Yeah, definitely recommend that this time of year. It's good listening. And yeah, I think I've said most of what I wanted to say today, but just take it easy during the eclipses. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't be outside or observing them if that's something you want to do safely. The ancients they advised people to stay inside and not be out under the baleful rays. But, I think to each their own, and think about it. It's also not a time that's usually suggested for working with the eclipse, like working with the energy with the moon. But again, different folks have different things that they like to try. It's just unpredictable, and I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that it's harder to predict what might come of any work being done under them, because quite literally the moon and the sun are like obscuring each other. So like our sources of light and sources of our, wayfinding are obscured. So it's a little bit like putting on a blindfold and like throwing a dart. But at the same time, I do feel like in those third and ninth house eclipses, by the end of them, it felt like I was riding this wave of like energy of like, I'm gonna just absorb as much information in this time period that I can. So in a way, I was working with them, but maybe more large scale, like thematically, for that year and a half or so. Those houses being activated, maybe less so on like a ritual level. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on eclipses for today. I might want to revisit this again next week. But yeah, why not, if you have any eclipse stories or anything you want to share, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a comment on this wherever you find it. And of course, any kind of feedback you have, if you'd like to leave a review, that is always much appreciated. Next week, I'm going to be releasing another episode of the Astro Garden featuring a fellow astrologer. It will be the episode I recorded with Camille Michelle Gray, and I'm super excited about it. So get excited about that. I'm again like upping the frequency of these, so I'm going to try to do these solo episodes once a week, and I'm trying to up the frequency on the guest episodes too, to be every other week instead of just once a month. So I'm going to be reaching out to more people who have expressed interest in joining me. If I have not spoken to you about that, but that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to send me an email. I'd probably love to have you on here if you're an astrologer or astrology adjacent. I'd love to hear your story about how you found astrology, the things you love about it. And if you have other topics you'd like to talk about, I would be game to hear about that too. So thanks for listening. It's really fun to see how many people are like listening to these solo episodes. I am shocked every time that so many of you would like to actually hear what I'm saying. It feels really nice, and I just appreciate all of you. So thanks for taking the time to listen. Sending you all lots of love and the best of luck with eclipse season. I'll be back next week. Thanks. For more information about my work, you can find me at byjoveastrology.com, on Instagram at byjoveastro, and on Twitter at byjoveastrology.